Welcome to Weimerica Weekly. I'm your host, Ryan Landry. Weimerica Weekly is hosted and distributed by Social Matter. I wanted to use this podcast to discuss the odd situation of modern masculinity in America. And in doing so, I'm going to use the best character in Western literature who represents this enigma or this problem. Bruno Clement from Michel Houellebecq's The Elementary Particles. Now, if you're a British listener, this was translated as atomized, and I actually think it's a better title. And now, before I go into it, I would want to say this is timestamped to be right around the recent bannings on Twitter of figures like Bronze Age Pervert, Cantbot, Manikinone. And I'd like to say that I believe Manikinone was a philosophical figure navigating the sexual marketplace. And somebody came up with a phrase that I thought was perfect for what he is. And he's a swole Houellebecq. And it's, I thoroughly enjoyed him. And getting to know him online, he's somebody that I respected. Now, to get back to this podcast. Now, didn't you say the issue is masculinity in America? Weimerica? Yes, I did. But who is a better prophet for the state of the West and the situation that is Weimerica than the French author Michel Houellebecq? He saw it all decades in advance. I'm going to be talking about a character from a book from 1998. Houellebecq is our prophet, or John the Baptist for the modern sexual marketplace. Now, before I get there, I did want to steal from myself and discuss the way modern society safely labels men, that our culture feels free to say out loud without any fear of consequences. Now, it's without fear of consequences because most people are just going to drink their drink and duck their head and not get into an argument. So here goes, if a man likes working out, he's a narcissist. If a man with gray or no hair buys a sports car, he's an old man struggling with a midlife crisis. If a man buys a big truck or an SUV, he's an overcompensating loser. If a man isn't married by 35, he's a little boy afraid of commitment. If a man won't marry a single mom, he's a coward who won't man up. If a man works 50 hours a week or more, he's a workaholic. If a man plays video games after age 22, he's a man-child. Now, if a man likes dating younger women, he's an immature creep that can't handle a woman his age. If a man drinks during the work week, he might be a drunk. If a man gives a woman unwanted attention, he's a creep. If he does so at work, he's fired. If a man doesn't pay for a date, he's a cheapskate. If a man is home when his daughter has a sleepover, he's a molestation threat. If a man likes thin feminine women, he's a brainwashed sizist. If a man is a military veteran, he is a domestic terrorism threat. If a man has a deep, meaningful friendship with another man, well, he's a closet case. That's a bromance, brother. If a man wants his lower-earning wife to stay home after she has kids, he's an evil patriarch, limiting the freedom of a woman to be herself. If a man buys a slightly smaller than expected engagement ring and not the proper 2-month salary, he might not be right for you. If a man discourages promiscuous behavior and values chastity, he's a slut-shaming oppressor. If a man likes the look of 18 to 21-year-old women, he's a borderline pedo. That's kind of problematic, okay? If a man treats you like a lady, he's a pal, he's a buddy, he's a good old friend. If a man works hard with adult pursuits and can't keep up with the latest pop culture, he's an out-of-touch doofus. If a man has sex with other men, he's a fabulous accessory for young women to treat like a pet chihuahua. If a man fights for custody of his kids, he's a second-class citizen. And if a man wants to cut his dick off, slap a wig on, and destroy his male identity, he's a courageous, perfectly healthy, and mentally well-adjusted saint. Now, these are all the phrases, labels that people slap on men who engage in a simple consumer choice or a simple behavioral trait. These labels get slapped on because people do not fear any consequences. They don't fear any pushback on it. and they feel that they have the upper hand if they say these things. And this is also partly the pop psychology. Just people have internalized psychology and the numerous psych majors that are floating out there, and not just the psych majors, but Freud himself might be slammed by academia, but the broader culture has taken his templates. They've taken his views as doctrine, and they've applied it to seeing everyone else. And it's also probably a function of so many Weimericans popping head meds and sitting on the doctor's couch for examination. Now it's that widespread. It was integral, for the television show, the television show that supposedly changed television, The Sopranos. And as much as Tony Soprano fought therapy and the idea of it, he still went back. He still continued to go. That was his route. If you look at what people do now when they run into trouble, they say they're going to go to rehab. They say they're going to go to a therapist. They don't say anymore that they're going to, find Jesus. That's for paroles to do. And Tony Soprano himself, to fall back on that fictional portrayal, he was such a great symbol of late 20th century American masculinity. And he was better than Don Draper as an example of a masculine man from the supposed golden age of television. From top to bottom, Tony is a better man, even though he's a criminal. And, due to the story's setting, it's a better symbol. There's more immediacy for him and how he relates to the 21st century American male and the position he finds himself in. But they are not the topic for today's exploration of masculinity. Bruno Clement is, and Bruno is one of the two leads in Houellebecq's Elementary Particles. And as I've said before, the British title is atomized, and that feels better because we live in such an atomized society. Now, before I get into discussing Bruno, I need to preface this as Elementary Particles is a nearly 20-year-old book. So if I spoil things, tough luck. I will always issue the disclaimer when I talk about this book that this book changed my life. It was the right place, right time, right book, right age. I was a young man living in Europe, and I was astounded by the feminine and already decayed secular culture that I was an American. I was an alien in. And I saw the men as pushovers. And I remember going to parties and thinking, okay, if the soccer hooligan crowd isn't here, I pretty much can look around and think, okay, I could take each of these guys in a fight. I mean, I was stunned by how tight the pants were that the men wore. It was terrible. I said that's for women. Women are supposed to wear clothes like that. So everywhere I went with my baggier pants that were just cut to a regular fit, people would say, oh, it's the Yank, it's the American. I mean, sex was everywhere. It was even in their ice cream ads. I mean, Dove bars, fruit bars that a kid would go to the ice cream stand to buy. There was one where a nude woman was on a bed of strawberries, and strawberries were strategically placed on her nipples and her crotch. And she was this, glamour model, spectacular figure. And the children lining up to buy ice cream were, 4 feet tall. So it was just, her naked body was, boom, right there, right at their eye level. And I saw and I could witness man reduced to mere consumer. And no one really had connections outside of government. They only had connections outside of the government-sponsored events, government-sponsored, groups, associations. They were Eloy before I knew of the Eloy-Morlock alliance. And I picked up this book on a break, and I read it in a weekend. I mean, it's that engrossing of a read. And suddenly, a writer, Houellebecq, was telling me exactly what I was seeing and how it was somehow broken and wrong. And this secular society was a Disney amusement park, but one where the colors are just a bit off, and the animatronics are not as smooth. The churches are sparsely attended, or the churches are converted to housing. They're converted to gyms. The women openly talk about using the abortion pill. I mean, the sex was just so easy, and then all of the only children. And it felt weird as an American visiting, and elementary particles let me know it was not just my eyes. It wasn't just me seeing it. The decadence and the decline were real. Now, the book's two leads are half-brothers, Bruno and Michel. And if you read the book and you look into Houellebecq's past, you can see how the brothers are the two parts of Houellebecq. Now, I enjoyed this and considered it a bit of Houellebecq playing with the idea of the bicameral mind by allowing the two brothers to have these long philosophical debates over bottles of wine or a meal. But who is Bruno? Because he's the more wild child. But he's also the one you're going to see more often around you in Weimerica. Now, Bruno is the son of a hippie free love enthusiast, and she sent him packing from boarding school to boarding school. He never quite fit in. He has no father figure. He has no man to create an ideal and a role model. Now, neither does his brother, his half-brother, Michel, and they are both at the mercy of their shared mother's horrible liberation. Now, their mother is a one of those horrible, I'm never going to grow up hippies. She still slept with much younger men in her middle and older years, as if the act of sex could steal some of the men's young essence. And the betrayal of the mother was so horrendous that Houellebecq's own mother wrote a book to defend herself, because in real life, his mother did abandon him to live in Brazil with some young lover. And Houellebecq's aloof relationship with his real-life father is reflected more in Platform. And in Platform, the lead's dad, even though he dies early on, the lead never kind of understood his dad, and the father never understood him, and there's the death, and the son's kind of like, big effing deal, who cares? And Houellebecq is not even his parents' surname. It's actually his grandmother's that raised him. But at the start of the novel, Bruno is a middle-aged divorced man in good shape. He's got one son. He's a teacher. He's a failed writer. And he tries for love here and there, but he's often not the winner sort. And Bruno is hypersexual. He is always on the hunt. He is always wanting it. He is never satisfied with no amount of sex that he's getting. And he will even surreptitiously play with himself when he's just watching younger women around. He's just obsessed with sex, and he constantly has fantasies. He uses prostitutes. He does the online sex chatting, which, if you read Houellebecq's other book, Whatever, you can kind of see where he moved from Whatever to this book. But he's always on the lookout. Now, was he married? Yes. And herein is some of the modern male tragedy. Now, he marries a woman who has a rockin' body, nice large breasts, and to paraphrase Bruno, and he specifically mentions that he always had a kink for large breasts and lingerie, as if he was an excitable teen, first glimpsing a magazine. He still has that as an adult man. And Bruno has this great line that I find unforgettable, and it's like, when the tits went south, so did our marriage. And once he loses the sexual lust, that spark, that fire, the marriage really had no foundation of love, and voila, they're divorced. And then in divorce, Bruno found quickly that he couldn't compete. He's not all that attractive. And herein he reveals, the modern sexual marketplace issue, where there's much more emphasis on a man's appearance. And this kind of goes back to Manikinone, who said, you gotta looks max. You just gotta looks max. Game doesn't matter as much now. You gotta be hot, or these girls are not gonna swipe right. So what does Bruno do that you hear other middle-aged men suddenly pick up? He starts weightlifting. And he mentions that he sees immediate results as he notices his shoulders and his pecs shape up. Then he got some attention, and like the ever-resentful Gamma or Delta, not the attention from the women he felt he deserved. He's a man driven by his passions with zero agency, like he's a rookie in the sexual game. But he's still obsessed with the status that sexual relations would grant him. He's just completely drilled down his masculinity to who am I having sex with? And this is the only way I can define myself. Now tell me, that's plenty of men you probably know. Maybe it's you and you just haven't admitted it. Bruno's sadness, his very deep sadness, is revealed in a section where he discusses the gap between him and his son. Now, in a more horrible way than Bruno not having a father, Bruno is a father. He is present, but he has no connection to his son. Now, Bruno laments that he has nothing to pass on to his son. There's no skill, no ability, no trait, no memory. Bruno's a modern homo economicus, or the grown man-child. He still has childish pursuits. He's still just chasing tail. And Houellebecq was not alone in seeing this. And Nick Hornsby's novel, High Fidelity, not the Cusack movie, which is entertaining. High Fidelity centers around a record shop owner who's also in his mid-30s, but no kids, no real pursuits, but he's a well-kept pet. He's a well-kept pet of the state. And I'd argue this is a function of the secularization of Europe and the huge welfare state that they had there, that it hit faster and harder than in America. And America has that obsession with fun that would always taint our nihilism. There'd always be a happy edge to our nihilism. We would seek new experiences in our decadence, if only to claim we did something new. This is the vitalism phase that Larry Oster or Jacques Barzun comments on in America's decadence, and which stages are we entering in our nihilism. And Bruno does not see that he has nothing to pass on because he was absolutely free. I mean, his absolute freedom, he never had a duty. And he had no real family, and he had no real family duties. He had no real connection to his past, nor to a specific community. He just went from school to school. He had no bonds. He had no roots. And there was nothing for him to do. There was no requirements for him in life to do something, to earn something, to cherish. He was absolutely free. Now, he never had a hobby worthwhile to develop a prized possession, a prized skill to pass on to his son, to explain to his son, this will be yours. This is why it's yours. This is why I do this. There was no war for Bruno to fight. There was no event that he could claim pride in, to tell his son about. What was he going to be, the May 68 guy? Forget it. And he and Michael, in their conversations, blast the boomers. That the boomers' era of free love was nothing but recycling. Even the dark S&M stuff was nothing but recycling old passions, old drives. I mean, I recommend this book. This book is fantastic. And there's something to this, I'd say, that, in middle age, especially in America, there's definitely the tension between boomers when they were in their 40s and 50s and the greatest generation. And the boomers did not have the tales of surviving World War II, surviving Korea. They didn't have the shared misery of the Great Depression. Boomers might have had Vietnam, might have. If they were on the older side and if they were drafted or enlisted. Because remember, Vietnam, they stopped sending guys there in 72. So if you were born after 54, you missed Vietnam entirely. And that's about a decade of boomers. Boomers had what? Disco? Selling out from being anti-establishment to yuppie-dom? Or as I put it, they enjoyed the golden age of sex, which was post-pill, pre-HIV, pre-obesity crisis. Basically 1968 to 1982. Maybe 1984 if you want to stretch it out. I mean, what a glorious era. Now, Bruno does find real love. I mean, he eventually finds it, and as a divorced man, he meets a woman, Christiane, and she's the sensual lover that he needs. Absolutely pleasing. Bruno remarks on something that's better explored in Houellebecq's platform, but the sensual, the romantic, the passionate, it's all been stripped from Western sex, as we seemingly have it all around us at all times. But there's something missing to it. Platform perfectly captures that. I could talk about Platform for another podcast. But Bruno, the sex addict, finally has a lover who realizes that feeding his passions is an amazing act of service and giving, and she wants to give him all that he wants. There's one sequence, I think, where she's like, do you want me to perform X on you on the drive to the cafe, or do you want me to do something to you in the cafe? And he's like, oh, please, on the drive. And she's like, yeah, I knew it. Like, he couldn't wait. Like, he has no patience. He's still a kid, and she understands and she still loves him. But Bruno comments on Christiane's hand technique, that it's not the mechanical, almost feverish motions of girls in the sex clubs, but it's more of a slower, thoughtful, sensual pace. There's the connection of not just the act, but actually loving somebody. Ooh, wow, amazing. Sex can be great if you actually care about the person. Now, Christiane's fate is the same as Michael's lover's fate, Annabelle. Annabelle and Christiane are the women that end up being the two women that love these brothers at this moment in their lives. And both women, spoiler alert, both women end up committing suicide after they suffer medical disabilities of a sort. There's a gender-specific critique here where one can say that these women could no longer perform the role of a woman for their men. And in Annabelle's case, that she could not bear a child. And that's from complications from prior abortions. Ooh, this is definitely a great read, please. And Christiane suffers an accident and therefore cannot be the passionate, caring lover. And Bruno would then have to care for her. And these two women end up killing themselves. So, the criticism is that there's no identity. These women have no identity except as being in service to these men. And that's one way of looking at it. In retrospect, looking at Houellebecq's other books, he's a bit of a modern Sophocles. And Sophocles was the Greek playwright where everybody in his plays is always killing themselves or maiming themselves. Houellebecq is just a dark dude. And his characters, leads, ancillary characters, they often die or kill themselves. And the fate of these two women seemed to fall into Houellebecq's dark mode of self-destruction, more than the female functional identity issue. Now, Bruno eventually goes mad, and he has a great line where he talks about his desire for younger women, and that heterosexuals are just better liars compared to homosexuals. And Bruno says there's an honesty to them, that homosexuals are just chasing after the newest tight little ass. And Bruno eventually dislikes, there's an immigrant who dates a very cute French girl in his class, and he grows to hate the boy, the teenage boy. But then Bruno develops an obsession for an immigrant girl himself. And so the taboo becomes Bruno's final thirst. And Bruno gets sent to an asylum. And in it, he writes a weird story where a woman and a dog end up kissing and being together, and the dog can talk after one of them saves the other from drowning, and they live on an island together, something like that. So his brother Michael is the sensible, quieter brother, and he has this view of Bruno like, hey, at least you're writing. You're crazy, but at least you're writing. Michael understands the tragedy that is his brother, and so will you, the reader. Bruno and Michael, they're characters that are all around us. But the Brunos outnumber the Michaels. And it's not just, yes, there's genes, and yes, you have to take accountability for yourself. But in Weimerica, we have a generation of men raised by women. And we have a generation of men, due to declining birth rates, that say you grew up with your father, he might have had one brother. Maybe you had one uncle, maybe you had a grandfather. But with the multi-generational decline we've had, there are plenty of families where you might only even know one of your grandfathers. And that's if your dad's still in the house. So the amount of men you have as role models around you is limited. And I was very, very fortunate. There were many men around me that I could see different ways of being a man. And I'm very thankful for them. As many of them were, with their flaws, they were still lovable characters. But not every man in America has that. And many of these men do not know how to be a man or even what a man is. So they seek expressions in whatever comes across their path. And Brunos have spent a lifetime searching. They've searched for that male identity. And when they have a son, they know not how to express it. And beyond that, they feel they have nothing to give to their own flesh and blood. And these men have all the freedom they could ask for, but in that freedom they are miserable. Now, all is not lost. Men can not only find models of behavior, but can become role models. The path to liberation offered in the celebration or the elevation of the individual above all else, it proved to be a cold, solitary journey. Now another path is there, and that's a path that ties one to others. And there are duties, there are privileges, there are requirements. And we want to help the Brunos out there. And we want to prevent future Brunos from forming. There is a duty in this task. There is sacrifice. There is responsibility. But in this duty, men will find purpose, and men will find belonging, and men will find identity, and men will have something to pass on. So thank you for listening to Weimerica Weekly. I'm Ryan Landry, and I'll talk to you next week.